She received the wedding invitation on a Tuesday morning, and she laughed. Not the laugh of a broken woman pretending to be fine. Not the hollow, practiced laugh of someone masking pain with performance. Maya Williams laughed the way a woman laughs when the universe delivers something so perfectly ironic that the only reasonable response is joy. She set the gold-embossed envelope down on her glass desk, a desk that overlooked the Seoul skyline from the 42nd floor of a building that bore her company's name, and she laughed until her assistant knocked on the door to check if she was okay. "I'm fine, Jess," she said, wiping the corner of her eye. "Better than fine." She picked up the invitation again and read it slowly. Kang Ji-hoon and Seo-rin Park cordially requested her presence at their union. The wedding of the decade, the press was already calling it. The merger of two elite Korean bloodlines. Black tie, grand ballroom. 300 guests minimum, all of them wealthy, all of them powerful, all of them the kind of people who measured a person's worth in stock portfolios and family names. And Ji-hoon had invited her, his ex-wife, the woman he had divorced 5 years ago with the coldness of a man discarding an old receipt. Maya set the invitation face down and swiveled her chair toward the window. Below, Seoul pulsed with its usual restless energy. She had built something extraordinary in this city. She had come back to it, not as the wounded woman who had fled from it, but as someone the city itself had learned to make room for. And now, Kang Ji-hoon, the man who had told her she would never survive without him, had personally summoned her to watch him marry someone else. She knew exactly what this was. She had known Ji-hoon for a long time, long enough to understand that everything he did was calculated, strategic, designed to produce a specific emotional outcome in the people around him. He didn't send this invitation out of goodwill or maturity or some desire for peaceful closure. He sent it because he wanted to see her face. He wanted her to sit in that room, watch him stand at the altar with a beautiful, socially acceptable woman, and feel the weight of everything she had supposedly lost. What he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, because he had never bothered to find out, was exactly how wrong he was. Maya picked up her phone and called her mother. "The invitation came," she said. There was a pause on the other end. Then her mother said, "And?" "I'm going to go." Another pause, longer this time. "Maya, I know what you're going to say. Do you? You're going to say I don't owe him anything. You're going to say walking into that room is giving him exactly what he wants. You're going to say I've built something beautiful and I shouldn't drag it anywhere near his orbit." All of that, her mother said. And also, what about the children? Maya's gaze drifted to the framed photograph on her desk. Noah and Nia, 7 years old, photographed last summer on a beach in Portugal. Noah had his father's jaw, sharp and defined even at 7. Nia had his eyes, that particular dark intensity that could look through a person rather than at them. They were brilliant, kind, ferociously curious children, and they were the reason Maya had worked herself to the bone for 5 years without stopping to exhale. "The children," Maya said quietly, "are exactly why I'm going." 5 years earlier, Maya Williams had left Korea with 2 suitcases, a broken heart, and a secret she hadn't yet fully processed. She had been 29 years old. She had been 8 weeks pregnant, though she wouldn't confirm it until she was back on American soil, sitting in a clinic in Atlanta with her mother holding her hand. She had met Kang Ji-hoon 7 years before that, when they were both students in a London business program. He had been charming then, brilliant in that uncomfortable way that made other people in the room feel slightly behind. He had been hungry for success, for recognition, for a future that didn't look like the modest neighborhood in Busan where he had grown up. Maya had understood that hunger because she carried her own version of it. The daughter of a black woman from Georgia who had worked double shifts her entire life to give Maya opportunities. She knew exactly what it meant to want something so badly You could feel it as a physical ache. They had fallen in love the way young, ambitious people fall in love, fast, intense, and with the absolute certainty that this was the person who understood them. Maya had seen Ji-hoon's potential before anyone else did. When he'd come to her in their second year with a half-formed business idea scrawled in a notebook, she hadn't laughed. She had sat down with him for 6 hours and helped him build the model into something coherent. She had stayed up with him through the pitch preparation, challenged his assumptions, sharpened his arguments. She had believed in him with a totality that, looking back, had left very little room to believe in herself. They had married quietly in London. His family had not attended. That should have been the first signal, the one Maya should have read more carefully. But she was in love, and love had a way of filing down the edges of warning signs until they felt smooth and harmless. When Ji-hoon's first company found its footing, Maya had celebrated with him. When it scaled, she had celebrated again. When his family finally began to acknowledge his success, and by extension, to tolerate his wife, Maya had told herself that they were simply cautious people who needed time. She had tried. She had learned to prepare dishes his mother favored. She had studied enough Korean to hold a conversation, though his family always replied in English, a small cruelty designed to remind her of the distance between them. And then the money became serious money, and something in Ji-hoon shifted. It happened slowly enough that Maya kept doubting her own perception. He began coming home later. He began taking calls in rooms she wasn't in. His family's visits became more frequent, and after those visits, he was always colder, more distant, as though they were slowly turning a dial down on whatever warmth he had left for her. She heard things secondhand, that his mother had told him Maya was not suited for the life he was building, that she was temporary, that a man of his stature needed a partner who could move through Korean elite society without creating friction. She never confronted him with any of this directly. She kept waiting for him to come back to himself. She kept believing that the man she had fallen in love with, the one who had spread his notebook across her kitchen table and trusted her with his most fragile dreams, was still in there somewhere. Then she found out she was pregnant, and she thought, this is it. This is the thing that brings him back. She told him on a Friday evening. She had made dinner. She had been nervous in a way she hadn't been nervous since her first major business presentation, her palms slightly damp, her heart working too hard. Ji-hoon had gone very still when she told him. She had watched him process it, watched something move across his face that she couldn't immediately name. Then he said, "You planned this." She had heard him clearly. She had simply, for a moment, refused to believe what she had heard. What? This pregnancy. His voice was flat, controlled. You planned it to secure your position. Maya had stared at him. Ji-hoon, I am your wife. I don't need to secure a position. This is our child. My lawyers will need to be informed. She had felt something inside her go very, very quiet. Not the quiet of peace, the quiet of a system shutting down to protect itself from damage. Your lawyers, she repeated. I think you should move to the guest room while we figure this out. She hadn't moved to the guest room. She had stood in that kitchen for a long moment, looking at the man she had loved for 7 years, and she had understood, with absolute clarity, that there was nothing left to save. Not because love had disappeared. Love, she would learn, was stubborn and irrational and lingered long past its usefulness, but because the person standing across from her had made a choice. He had chosen the version of his life that didn't include her, and no amount of love or history or pregnancy was going to reverse that. She had said very calmly, I loved you when you had nothing. I was there before any of this existed, and you are standing here accusing me of manipulation. Ji-hoon had not flinched. I'll have the papers drawn up. Fine, Maya had said. Do that. She had not told him about the twins. She had not known yet that there were two. But even if she had known, She understood instinctively that she would not give him the opportunity to use her children as leverage or collateral. Any man who could look at his pregnant wife and say, "You planned this," was not a man she would trust with her children's emotional safety. She had signed the divorce papers 2 weeks later and left Korea on a rainy November morning. Jae-hoon had not come to see her off. His assistant had arranged a car to the airport. His parting words, delivered through the same assistant via text message, had been, "You will never survive without me." She had read that message in the car, and she had saved it. Not to dwell on it. Not to let it wound her. She had saved it the way a runner saves the voice of the person who said they'd never finish the race. She read it again every time she wanted to stop. Noah and Nia were born in March, in Atlanta, with Maya's mother in the room, and no one else. They came into the world loud and certain of themselves, which Maya took as a sign. She had held them both in the hospital bed, one in each arm, impossibly small, impossibly real, and she had made them a promise. She would build something. She would build something so substantial, so undeniable, that they would never spend a day of their lives feeling like they had to prove their worth to anyone. She had kept that promise with a ferocity that surprised even her. The tech company she founded, Loomis, had started in her mother's spare bedroom. She had coded through the nights while the twins slept in the next room. She had taken meetings from her laptop, often with a baby monitor on the desk beside her. She had pitched investors with the kind of quiet certainty that made people in rooms sit forward in their chairs, and she had closed those pitches more often than not. Loomis was built on an idea that Maya had actually first sketched out during her marriage, a platform designed to bridge logistical gaps in global supply chains using predictive AI. It was unglamorous in concept, but revolutionary in execution. And within 2 years, 3 Fortune 500 companies had integrated it into their operations. Within 3 years, the valuations were making headlines. Within 5, Loomis had expanded to 11 countries. Within 5 years, Maya Williams was worth more than Kang Ji-hoon. She had not planned it that way. She had planned to build something meaningful that supported her children. The scale had simply followed the work, the way it does when someone builds with genuine conviction rather than performance. But she would be lying if she said the number didn't give her a particular kind of satisfaction when she finally saw it on paper. She remembered a text message. She remembered a November morning and a car to the airport. And now she was going to a wedding. She did not tell Noah and Nia very much before they arrived at the venue. She had explained, carefully and age-appropriately, that they were going to attend a celebration where they would meet someone important. She had dressed them thoughtfully. Noah in a small dark suit that made him look improbably like a tiny CEO, and Nia in a structured ivory dress with her hair elaborately braided. They were 7, and they were radiant, and they moved through the world with the easy confidence of children who have been loved correctly. Maya wore black, not the black of mourning, the black of arrival. The venue was exactly what she had expected, a converted historic estate on the outskirts of the city, strung with lights, overflowing with the kind of wealth that expresses itself through subtlety rather than flash. Security at the entrance, a red-carpeted walkway, photographers positioned for the key moments. Maya moved through it with a stillness that attracted glances immediately. She was striking in the way of women who have stopped performing and started simply existing. And that quality drew eyes the way a low sound draws the body's attention before the mind catches up. She heard the whispers begin almost immediately. Is that Maya Williams? The Loomis founder? What is she doing here? She's his ex-wife, I think. That's her? She kept walking. Noah held her left hand. Nia held her right. She did not look around the room for Ji-hoon. She found a seat toward the center, not the back, where one hides, and not the front, where one performs. And she settled into it with her children beside her. Ji-hoon saw her from across the room. She knew the exact moment it happened, because she felt the shift in the air the way you feel a change in pressure before a storm. She didn't turn to look at him. She watched Nia arrange the small beaded purse Maya had let her carry, very seriously, on her lap, and she felt something that was almost entirely peace. Almost. Ji-hoon had been having what he considered a perfect morning. Seo-rin had looked extraordinary in her dressing room, composed, elegant, born for exactly this kind of occasion. His family had arrived early, and his mother had looked around the venue with an expression of approval she rarely showed anyone. His company's PR team had already confirmed 12 media outlets were covering the event. Everything was proceeding with the precision of a plan that had been engineered rather than simply hoped for. And then his assistant had touched his elbow very quietly and said, "Sir, she's here." Ji-hoon had turned with the slow confidence of a man who expected this moment to go a specific way. He had imagined Maya's entrance many times over the past weeks. He had imagined her arriving looking diminished, or worse, trying very hard not to look diminished. He had imagined the satisfaction of being seen in this context, the grand venue, the elite guests, the imminent ceremony, by the woman who had once watched him sketch ideas in a notebook. What he had not imagined was the woman who was actually walking through the room. Maya moved with the kind of presence that doesn't announce itself loudly because it doesn't need to. She was composed in a way that wasn't performance. He could see that immediately, and it unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. She looked like someone who had made peace with something large and was now simply living in the aftermath of that peace. She looked, he thought with a cold drop in his stomach, like someone who had won. And then he saw the children. He noticed the boy first. Dark suit, straight spine, eyes scanning the room with an alertness that was immediately and viscerally familiar, because Ji-hoon saw it every morning in his own mirror. The jaw, the particular set of the mouth. Then the girl, whose eyes found Ji-hoon's from across the room with a directness that stopped his breath. His first thought was, "That's not possible." His second thought was, "Those are mine." His third thought, which arrived not as words, but as a full-body physical sensation, was the memory of Maya standing in his kitchen saying, "I loved you when you had nothing." He crossed the room without deciding to. People moved aside without being asked, because something in his face had changed dramatically enough that the social instinct to create space kicked in for everyone around him. He reached Maya before the ceremony began, before Seo-rin had emerged, before the officiant had called for quiet. Maya looked up at him the way you look at something you have prepared for, without surprise, without performance. "You came," he said. It came out differently than he'd intended, less triumphant, more bewildered. "You invited me," she said. He looked at the children. The boy was looking at him with that expression, curious, assessing, calm. The girl had found something interesting in her beaded purse and was examining it with focused attention. "Who are they?" His voice was very low, almost private, though the people immediately around them had gone very still and very quiet, in the way people do when they sense they're witnessing something they weren't supposed to witness. Maya met his gaze. She didn't rush the moment. She let it sit. "Noah and Nia," she said. Pause, long enough to be its own statement. "Your children." The room didn't erupt the way a room erupts when someone shouts. It erupted the way a room erupts when everyone stops pretending not to have heard something. The silence broke into overlapping whispers that spread in every direction like a stone dropped in still water. Ji-hoon heard his own name multiple times in the next 5 seconds. He heard the word, children. He heard a woman nearby say, "Is she serious?" in a tone of absolute fascination. He stood completely still. 7 years old. They were approximately 7 years old. The timeline hit him in the chest with the precision of something calculated rather than felt. And then the feeling followed. Enormous. Disorienting. Too large to look at directly. "You," he began. "Don't," Maya said. very quietly. Not angry, just firm, in the way of a woman who has thought through this conversation many times and has decided exactly how it will go. "Maya, you kept my children from me. I kept them safe," she said, "which is what you do with things you love when the environment around them isn't safe. That isn't your decision to make. You told me," she said, still quietly, still without raising her voice, though the room had gone so still that she barely needed to. "That I planned the pregnancy to secure my position. Those were your words. You looked at the news that your wife was carrying your child, and your response was to call your lawyers. You told me I would never survive without you. And then you had your assistant text me from the car. Your assistant, Ji-hoon." He opened his mouth. Nothing came. "So yes, I made the decision that I made, and I would make it again." Seo-rin appeared at the top of the entrance staircase at exactly the wrong moment. She had been prepared for a grand entrance. The soft music, the turned heads, the collective intake of breath that a bride is meant to inspire. Instead, every head in the room was already turned in a completely different direction, and the sound that greeted her wasn't an intake of breath, but a compound murmur of conversation that no one seemed interested in abandoning. She came down the stairs slowly, trying to understand what she was looking at. Ji-hoon, her Ji-hoon, who had spent 6 weeks preparing for this day with military focus, was standing in the middle of the room with his back to her, speaking to a woman Seo-rin didn't immediately recognize. 2 children stood nearby, and something about the way Ji-hoon was holding himself, something about the particular rigidity of his shoulders, the way his hands had curled at his sides, told Seo-rin that whatever was happening was not manageable. A woman beside her leaned in and murmured, "That's his ex-wife." Seo-rin looked more carefully. She had heard about Maya Williams in the abstracted way one hears about a predecessor, briefly, without detail, with the implicit message that the subject was not worth further inquiry. She had not expected someone like this. She had not expected someone whose presence restructured the geometry of a room. "Why is she here?" Seo-rin asked, though part of her already didn't want the answer. "He invited her," the woman beside her said. Then, after a pause, "And those appear to be his children." Seo-rin stopped moving. "I want to know them," Ji-hoon said. His voice had changed completely. The control was cracking in the way of something that was never structural, just a surface. "You can't tell me I have 2 children and expect me to." "I haven't told you what to expect," Maya said. "I've told you the truth. What you do with the truth is your own matter to work out." "Maya." He said her name with a weight she hadn't heard from him in years, the weight of the version of him she had actually loved, the one who had been uncertain and genuine and capable of something resembling humility. "Please." She looked at him. She let herself really look at him, the way she had stopped letting herself do years ago because it had been too painful. He looked older, as one expects after 5 years. But the age had settled on him strangely, expensively but anxiously, like a man who has everything and is exhausted by the effort of keeping it. "You didn't invite me here because you missed me," she said. "You invited me here because you wanted to see me small. You wanted to perform your success in front of me. You thought I was going to walk in here looking like I hadn't recovered." He said nothing, which was answer enough. "I have recovered, Ji-hoon. I have done more than recover." At that moment, the doors at the back of the venue opened again, and a woman in a publicist's blazer entered and moved briskly toward the event coordinator, handing him a tablet. The event coordinator looked at the screen. Something on his face changed. He leaned toward the nearest journalist and said something quietly, and the journalist looked at his own phone and then stood up with the particular alertness of a person who has just been handed a story. The buzz that followed was different from the buzz of the children revelation. This was faster, sharper, less confused. It moved through the room in the direction that technology gossip always moves, from the business journalists to the financial guests to the people who monitored their stock portfolios the way other people check the weather. Someone near Ji-hoon said, "Wait, Loomis just announced their Q2 valuation?" Someone else said the number. Ji-hoon heard it. Maya watched him do the math, which took approximately 3 seconds, given that he was a man who had always been very fast with numbers. She watched his expression move through the calculation and arrive at the result. The result was that his ex-wife's company was now worth more than his, not marginally, significantly. The room understood this simultaneously, and the collective recalibration was almost audible, the subtle shift of 200 people quietly reassessing the social hierarchy they'd walked into. Ji-hoon, who had spent the last 5 years as the acknowledged apex of every room he entered, felt the shift, the way a very tall structure feels the first serious wind. He didn't fall, but he moved. "You built that," he said. It wasn't quite a question. "I built that," she confirmed. "While raising." He looked at Noah and Nia, and something in his face did something complicated and private that Maya had not expected to see and looked away from, because some things are not hers to witness anymore. While raising them, alone. "Not entirely alone," she said. "My mother. Good people. A very good team. But yes, I built it and I raised them. And I did it without your name, without your money, without your network, and without your belief, which, as it turns out, I didn't need." He was quiet for a long time. Around them, the wedding had entered a state of suspended animation. No one was leaving. Social curiosity is powerful, and this was the kind of scene that people would describe at dinner tables for years. But no one was proceeding toward the ceremony either. The officiant stood at the altar looking uncertain. The string quartet had stopped playing. Seo Rin had found a chair and was sitting in it, with the careful composure of a woman who is processing a very large amount of new information. Ji-hoon ran a hand over his face. It was the most unguarded gesture Maya had seen him make in years, possibly since the days when he used to fall asleep at his desk and wake up embarrassed about it. "What do you want from me?" he asked. "Want from you?" Maya tilted her head slightly. "Ji-hoon, I came here because you invited me. I brought our children because they are 7 years old, and they deserve the opportunity to know their father, if their father proves capable of knowing them. I came because I wanted to look you in the eye, in the room you built for my humiliation, and show you that I am not humiliated. I don't want anything from you. I haven't wanted anything from you for a very long time. But the children, visitation, custody, I'll fight for—" "You don't need to fight," she said, more quietly now. "You need to grow. Those are different things. One of them requires lawyers. The other one requires work." She paused. "Our children are not a battlefield. If you want to be in their lives, I'm not going to prevent that. But I need to see that you've become someone worth letting in." Noah, who had been listening to the adult conversation with the focused attention of a child, who has always been trusted to be in the room for serious things, looked up at Ji-hoon for a long moment. Then he said, with the directness of someone who has not yet learned to be indirect, "Are you actually our dad?" The question landed in the middle of the room's collective silence, like something physical. Ji-hoon looked down at him, at the jaw that was his own, at the eyes that were his own, and something in him that had been rigid for a very long time came apart quietly. "Yes," Ji-hoon said. His voice was rough. "I am. Noah considered this. You didn't know about us?" Ji-hoon glanced at Maya. She said nothing, which was its own answer, and she did not look apologetic about it. "No," Ji-hoon said. "I didn't know." Noah said, "That must have been weird to find out today," with the matter-of-fact sympathy that children sometimes produce, which is more devastating than any adult cruelty, because it has no agenda. Ji-hoon's throat moved. "Yeah," he said. It was. Maya stood to leave 15 minutes later. She gathered her children and her composure and her bag, and she moved toward the exit with the same unhurried certainty with which she had arrived. Ji-hoon followed her outside, past the cameras and the hovering guests and the event staff, who had completely abandoned any pretense of managing the situation. He caught up to her, on the steps of the venue, in the open air, away from the audience. "Maya!" He was almost out of words now. She could hear it. "I was wrong. I was wrong about all of it. I let them get into my head. And I lost you. I lost everything." She turned to look at him. No anger. No satisfaction. Just the clear, settled expression of a woman who has moved through something vast and come out the other side. "No," she said. "You didn't lose me when I left." He waited. "You lost me when you stopped seeing my value, when I was useful to you, when you needed someone to believe in you, to build with you, to stay up through the night and sharpen your thinking. I was everything. And then, the moment you felt secure enough to not need me, you listened to the voices that told you I was a liability." She said it without bitterness, which made it land harder than bitterness would have. "You looked at me, and you saw the history I carried, and you decided it was a threat to the image you were building. But you never stopped to understand what you were throwing away." He tried to speak. She continued. "I'm not the woman who needs you to understand that anymore. I understand it myself, and that's enough." She took Noah's hand, then Naya's. "I'll have my lawyers send the appropriate documentation for establishing paternity formally. If you want to begin building a relationship with your children, you will do it slowly, and you will earn it. That is all I have to say." She turned. "Maya." His voice cracked on it, the single syllable of her name, and it carried everything that he didn't have the language left to express: the regret, the recognition, the specific devastation of understanding what you have discarded only at the point when you can no longer retrieve it. She paused, just for a moment, without turning back. "Take care of yourself, Ji-hoon. Genuinely. You have children now. They need a version of you that you haven't been yet." And then she walked away. Down the steps, across the courtyard, into the car that was waiting, that she had arranged herself, with her children beside her, and the Seoul skyline behind her, and her company's name on a building she could almost see from here. Behind her, the grand wedding she had supposedly been invited to humiliate descended quietly into the conversation it would be for the next several months. A spectacular unraveling, witnessed by 300 of Korea's most powerful people, orchestrated by the man who had believed he was doing the orchestrating. The journalists would write about it. The business press would write about Loomis. Someone would run the numbers on the valuation comparison, and the headline would write itself. Maya didn't look back. Noah fell asleep in the car 20 minutes later, his head tilted against the window, the small dark suit jacket folded across his lap. Nia was still awake, examining the beaded purse with something approaching scientific rigor. "Mama," Nia said without looking up. "Yes? Was that man really our dad?" "He was," Maya said. Nia was quiet for a moment. Then, "He looked like he was going to cry." "I think he was," Maya said. Nia considered this. Was it because he was happy? Maya looked at her daughter, at those eyes, at the intelligence behind them, at the whole extraordinary person she had raised, without any help from the man who had contributed half of her. "Not exactly," Maya said. "Sometimes people cry when they realize they made a mistake a long time ago that they can't undo, and all the time they lost is just suddenly there in front of them, and it's too heavy not to feel." Nia thought about this seriously. "Does he want to know us now?" "He does," Maya said, "but wanting something isn't the same as being ready for it. We'll see who he becomes." Nia nodded slowly, in the way of a 7-year-old who has somehow understood something genuinely complex. Then she went back to her purse. Maya looked out the window. The city moved past, lit and alive, and somewhere in its skyline was her building, and her work, and her life. The life she had built from the rubble of a man's certainty that she would fail. The life she had built with her hands and her mind, and her refusal to accept someone else's ceiling as her own. The man who had planned a humiliation was sitting in the ruin of his own wedding, surrounded by 300 witnesses, confronting the weight of 5 years of choices he couldn't unmake. And Maya Williams was going home. If this story gripped you from the first line to the last, you already know what to do. Hit that like button and let this video know it deserves to be seen. Subscribe if you haven't already, because there are more stories like this one waiting. Stories about women who were underestimated and worlds they built in the silence afterward. Drop a comment below. Tell me, what was the moment that hit you hardest? Was it the children's reveal, the valuation drop, or that final line on the steps? I read every single one. See you in the next story.